our latest episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool life podcast. I am your host, Megan, and my fabulous co-host is
Amanda.
Excellent. Our topic today is unlocking your child's inner writer, proven tips from a published author. And we are thrilled to have Jackson Pearce here with us today. Hello, hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we will introduce Jackson in just a moment, but we always start off our episodes, Jackson, with kind of a weekly check-in because part of our vibe on this podcast is there's so many homeschool influencers out there making their lives look so shiny and perfect all the time. And we're just not about making other people feel like crap because most of us don't actually live that way. So kind of a quick check-in of our lives. What's up with you, Amanda?
Yeah, so I'm actually in another hotel room. It's another week, another hotel room. We flew into Kansas City last night. Actually, we tried to get here all day yesterday. So that's kind of my life, right? Things were crazy. I pack at the last minute always. So I was packing right up until 3:00 when we had to leave for the airport. And then we got to the airport and our first flight was fine. And our second flight was delayed and delayed again and delayed again. And there were storms. And we finally checked into our hotel at 2 a.m. or so. And so by the time we all got to bed, it was 3 a.m. So we're feeling a little rough this morning. And the hotel coffee was crap. I would not recommend the coffee at this particular Sheraton. I'm just going to put that out there. So I'm going to do my best today, but we're not bringing our A game. Let's be real about that.
There you go. I'm having a very okay week. It's just kind of the usual levels of disastrousness, nothing too much, not like a couple of weeks when a tree fell through my house and, all that. It's just kind of like the usual stuff. I did set myself up for failure the other day. So my husband's out of the country for a while on business, which I don't know if you have a spouse or a partner who travels a lot for work, it's not all bad. The kids have just fully moved into my bedroom. They've put multiple televisions in there. They've got Mario Kart set up. They watch movies in there. We just have all night cuddle sessions that go for hours and hours and hangouts and we joke around and all that. So the other night they were playing a game on one of the TVs that they set up in my room. And I put this movie Dark Water on TV. It's old. It's Mark Ruffalo, Anne Hathaway, and it's about the DuPont scandal, how they were poisoning water streams and poisoning people with Teflon and all that stuff. And it's the legal case for that. And I put it on because I was getting some work done on my computer, not realizing how good the movie was going to be and not realizing that the kids were going to get invested in it. And it turned out to be way better than I expected. And not that I expected it to be bad, but we just kind of got sucked in. And then it was way longer than I expected. Next thing I knew, it was 2 a.m. and I was oh, this is going to suck tomorrow. I'm totally going to regret this. But we had fun and it was a good movie. So it was good. But yeah, awesome sauce. You want to give us your 90-second pulse check for the week, Jackson? How's your week going?
Let's see. My week, it's been an interesting week. Today is my nephew's birthday. He is turning 5. So we had his birthday party last Saturday, and he had the bounce house and everything. And my sister very casually to me said, hey, Jackson, maybe you could face paint or something. And my hyperfixation was yes, I can do that. And I immediately got all the face painting stuff and practiced and did all, and I painted 1 million Pikachus and 1 million kitty corns. And now it's all of my ads are face paint related or all of my YouTube suggestions, but I'm so into it. I'm I think I could really make a go of it as a face painter. This is a new career path. Forget all this writing stuff. I'm going to really, really focus on face painting. That's where the money is, I hear. But it is really fun. I did have a really good time. So yeah, but today is his actual birthday. I got him books, of course. That's what I always get him. He knows that's what I will get him. I actually selected a puzzle for him, but I made that officially come from my husband because I don't want to break my branding. I'm giving him books. That's what I'm giving him. There's no other possibility. That's what you're getting from me forever. So yeah.
I'm a book giver too. Everyone gets books in my world. My nephew's birthday is actually just in a couple days. He's probably desperately hoping that Auntie Amanda will give something other than books. But I'll be wrong.
Books. That's what you're getting. That's what you're getting. He did at one point say, I think I have enough books. And I was
that's not a thing.
That's actually, though, he really does love them. But I think, it's but it is funny to me. What books are you getting?
So I
do you not want to say, will he hear this?
No, he won't hear this. It'll be fine. I can't remember. I picked up one random thing that I saw and I thought he would like. And then my kiddo is still really into the Nathan Hale graphic novels.
Yeah, those are
the
great.
history ones. And so for right now, everyone in our world is getting a collection of those for every
Yeah.
birthday.
Yeah.
Soon we're going to have to move to something else because they're going to have the entire series from us. But
That's fair. That's fair. There's a really, really great series. Or I guess it's not technically a series. It's an author. Her name's Jennifer Nielsen. She writes
Oh,
really, really good historical fiction. It is like, it's often dark because it's historical fiction. Nathan Hale tends to be a little bit wackier in a great way. I love
yeah.
it, but like it might be like though like the next level, like when they wanna not only read about history but be a little bit sad about it too. I highly recommend Jennifer Nielsen's books. They're amazing. And then my all-time favorite historical fiction is The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. It's about a girl who evacuates London during the Blitz. I've never had a student dislike it. I absolutely love it. I'm not a rereader. I've read it so many times. Highly, highly recommend War That Saved My Life.
yeah.
My kid is, right? He reads a lot of that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty certain that I've gotten that book for him more than once at his request because I get it from the library. I'm not, right? That's not my thing. If I'm
Yeah.
reading, it's like either a parenting book or a smut book. I'll put that out there. I'm fine with that. Um, but yeah, solid suggestions.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm dropping the ball here. Let me get back on topic. Okay. So writing, right? Not just reading, but writing is a very common topic in the homeschool world. It totally makes sense. It makes sense for us personally. So just about in any career field, you need to be able to express your thoughts in writing, for better or worse, right? Additionally, right or wrong, people will often judge your overall intelligence by the way you write, by the way you express yourself in words. But it can be a difficult skill to teach. So that's where our guest today comes in. Jackson Pearce is a published author with 16 titles available for middle grades, teens, and adults. She wasn't recommending any of her books, but I will. Her books have been published in 23 languages and are available worldwide. So she's written the incredible EllieEngineer series, the Pip Bartlett series, and the Doublecross series. And for us adults, there's 6 ways to write a love letter, where she brings her trademark sense of humor and emotion to a compelling and hopelessly romantic story about how impossible fame and love can be on their own, much less together. I love how she's like feeling a little like, okay, she's just talking about me. That was totally me talking
It's
about.
it's my thinly veiled Taylor Swift book. So if you're a Swiftie, highly recommend 6 Ways.
That sounds fun. I'm actually like, up my alley
Yeah.
when I'm ready for a little less steam, but still want my romantic story.
There's some in there, so but it's yeah.
Well, excellent. Do you have a little an elevator speech or an elevator pitch you'd like to give us before we dive into our questions for you?
About my books or about writing in general?
Whichever you'd like to. You're here.
All
You're
of the
our
above,
guest.
yeah. So I think I have been a full-time writer for many years. It's all I ever wanted to be when I was young. It was the only sort of career goal I ever had in mind. And I've been a full-time writer for about 10 years. And in 2019, I started teaching classes online here and there. I'd always taught classes in person and done, school events, library events, that kind of thing. And I actually coached a sport for a long time too. So teaching was old to me, but online teaching exclusively was pretty new to me. And I started doing that in 2019. And then in 2020, a little something happened. Maybe you heard about it. And suddenly that's all I was doing. And I've been doing more and more of it, but I really, really love it. And I've found over and over again that even though, of course, each child is an individual, I do see the same issues related to writing and reading pop up, not only in each kid, but in each sort of family as a whole. And the way parents and caregivers are approaching the way they teach writing and reading to their kids.
No, for sure. Yeah, I have a ton of things, but I'll focus. Okay, so our first kind of question that's pretty direct and to the point is, why do you think writing is the thorn in so many homeschool moms' sides? What is it specifically about writing that sometimes makes it such a hurdle for learners to really feel confident with or enjoy?
Yeah. We could do an entire episode just on this question.
Right.
I think there's several factors at play. I think one of them is that writing is hard. And it's okay for it to be hard. Writing is hard for me, and I do it as a job, right? It's very difficult to take this like stew of things in your brain and like take it out of your brain and put it into little black and white pieces that somebody else is going to look at and then put them in their brain. Like writing is difficult. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean that you're not good at it. It just means that it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do. Also, everybody approaches writing a bit differently. Every writer approaches writing a bit differently. People see things differently. People approach that translation process differently. And then I finally think that there are a lot of different metrics by which we say somebody is a good writer, a bad writer, and in between writer. Unlike a lot of subjects that have very clear right and wrong answers, writing is very, very amorphous. And of course, you do have the standards of, spelling, grammar, punctuation. But beyond that, there's a lot more sort of gray area of what is successful and what is not successful. And I find that often parents and caregivers have a very clear idea of what they think a successful writer looks like. And it's not always in line with what their kid wants to write or thinks about writing, or it's just not always in line with what their kid is doing at that moment. And that can often create some discord, shall we say.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting kind of what you said there, because even a step beyond that, if you're homeschooling, you have all of these curriculums that show you the rubrics that you're supposed to judge the writing by. And none of us really knew that we were having our writing judged by rubrics. And maybe we weren't when, centuries ago when we were in school. Right. But now with Common Core, everything has a rubric. And even with the homeschool curriculums and the homeschool workbooks and things like that you're getting, a lot of them have that kind of graded rubric in there. And so I can only imagine it feels overwhelming for the kids, because I know when I look at that rubric, I'm like, how in the hell am I supposed to actually teach that? Like, I'm not even sure I know how to hit a 4 on this chart or whatever it is.
Sure.
And I consider myself a pretty good writer. I write quite a lot as well. Not like you do. I write like a monthly newsletter.
That's something.
But so there, I do think that like what it looks like and what it's supposed to look like, it doesn't always fit into this nice, neat rubric.
Sure.
But it can still be successful and good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That does get a bit tricky in the difference between academic writing and creative writing. And that's something that I very much struggled with when I was in school. Is I was a good creative writer, but then when I had to do like a research essay and I had to hit these certain, why can't I just write about what I know and just, I don't under. And that was a challenge for me. And it gets a bit tricky because we do want to make sure that when kids are doing academic writing or informative writing in some way, not creative writing, that they are able to eloquently express how they feel about an article they read, or break down a reading comprehension passage and really discuss that in a way that helps inform whoever the reader is. I do think that can get tricky, but I also do agree the rubrics sometimes are just like, I don't even like, what is even happening here? My husband's an AP teacher at a high school, and he teaches an AP Lang class. And he was talking to me about the AP rubric, and I was like, my head hurts. I can't, what is even happening here? It's very overwhelming.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think to dig a little deeper on what we were just talking about, kind of, right? We talked about writing is hard. And it's funny because when I was kind of putting some notes together for the session, I was trying to find a way to kind of word that, right? Like when we say, why is writing so difficult to teach? And it's one of those things like, well, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? I mean, you wouldn't have so many people struggling to become writers, or
Sure.
Struggling to, we hear stories about, I sent my book to 42 publishers before it got picked up, right? It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, sure.
But so what is it about writing, do you think, specifically in the way writing is taught, Jackson, that makes it different than teaching like algebra or US history? That is it that those things are more fact-based or more concrete, or what do you think is the difference that kind of trips people up when it comes to teaching writing?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above, because writing is both an art and a academic subject. And it's really one of the few that is both of those things, right? Math is math. And even if you love math, it's not, I don't think I'm going to get in trouble with mathematicians, aren't I? If I say math isn't an art, I can't say that. I'm not trying to get in trouble with mathematicians out there.
You'll be canceled.
I know, right? All the mathematicians are going to be angrily messaging me on Instagram. But there's, writing is something that you may just do purely for pleasure sometimes. And then other times you're doing it to get a grade and you might fail. And so that's a weird combination of things, and the idea that you can do it just for fun, and it doesn't matter. You can do it just because you enjoy it, the same way that you might sit down at a piano and just mess around because it's fun. Who cares? I'm not trying to play a song. I'm just making notes and it's nice. But then at the same time, writing again is often the judge. I'm sorry, the thing by which your intelligence is judged. The thing by which your grades and all your other subjects are often judged. It's this weird kind of dual art slash academia meshed into one. And I think that it gets very overwhelming for kids and parents alike, especially as I think parents and caregivers, as they want their kids to love the art part of writing, but also want them to get the academic part of writing correct. And sometimes valuing one comes at the cost of the other in the way we currently approach it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
So
completely.
true. Yeah, we definitely struggle with that in our house. I have a kiddo who absolutely loves creative writing and is, it's fun to read his creative writing. And then we struggle a hell of a lot more when it comes to the academic writing,
Yeah.
and I mean, yeah, there's a whole lot more that we could say about that, but for sure, right. And finding that balance and figuring out like how much you push the other or how much you try to put structure around the creative writing that he's doing, right? Because he's really enjoying it and he's doing it for fun in his free time. And so then do you try to overlay, well, make sure you have a climax and make sure you have a this and a that, or do you just let them go with it and just enjoy it because they're making sounds on a piano and enjoying it, not trying to put together a song,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think
So, go ahead.
I was going to say like the comparison to the art form too. So like my daughter had an issue today where she called me and, she's in art school. Everything is graded on interpretation of art, right? And she's entered a lot of competitions, national competitions and stuff. And it's like, you can enter something, but at the end of the day, you never have a clue what the judge's stylistic choices are, right? So you just don't know what in the math world, it's like, I'm not a math person, but I'm assuming you enter something, you do something or you turn something in and it's right or it's wrong, right? Like there's probably not a lot of, stylistic interpretation involved in math, right?
Yeah.
But, in the art world. And so that's a good point. When you're looking at writing, you've got the factual piece about, is this composed the way, but then you also have stylistic choices that are very open to interpretation. And that would make it really tough, I feel like.
Yeah, agreed, completely agreed. I do think that the way my way of approaching it is almost to treat them as, I don't want to say completely two separate things, but when I talk about creative writing with kids, I do talk a lot about structure, but I don't talk about it as you have to do this because if you don't do this, you got it wrong. But it's more what we're trying to do when we're telling our stories is we're trying to mess with people's heads. We're trying to make the reader feel how we want them to feel. We're trying to be the puppet master, right? I always ask them, what's the last book you cried at or laughed out loud at, or the last book that you were furious with a character? That character isn't real, but the author did such a good job that you had real human emotions based on that story. So that's what we want to do. We want to write so well that we make people cry. And they're always really into that, which I think says something psychologically about kids, but let's not even go there. But I kind of approach the structures and rules that come in creative writing are all about making your intentions clearer and making sure your story gets to the reader in the most effective and impactful way. It's not about rules for the sake of rules. It's about how can I make sure this gets into their brain? And I think once they're kind of accepting of that concept of rules in the creative world, it becomes a little bit easier to understand the concept of rules in the academic world. That said, I also, when it comes to academic writing, I will definitely tell kids, like, we just got to play the game. The game is 5 sentences in a paragraph, opening sentence. Like, sometimes the game is just the game. And that's part of the communication, that's part of it as well.
I like that.
It's an interesting point you make, right? You can really judge a book on how good it is by whether or not you're mad at the author or you're mad at the main character,
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so
It's true.
often, yeah, so often I won't finish a book because I'm mad at the author for not getting there or for
Yeah.
setting up a certain situation where like it's a no-win, like a lose-lose situation or something. And I'm like, oh, they did a terrible job with this. But if it's the main character that's in that situation or that's
Yeah.
evoking those feelings, you're like, what's going to happen next? I
Agreed.
accidentally stayed up until 6 a.m. reading a book. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I read, did either of you have to read Ethan Frome in high school?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. No,
It
listen,
was
I'm not,
it was assigned. I'm gonna
that's
probably go
valid.
out on a limb and say that I didn't read it, but it was
I remember
definitely
that
assigned.
one. I read it and I was so angry. I had the ACT the next day and I could not focus on the ACT because I was sitting there with just like rage in my heart at the long dead Edith Wharton. But I was like, how dare she? How dare she? Just full of anger. Still not over it, honestly. Still not over it.
I'm sitting here while you're all kind of talking about this, like listing books in my head that I've read, where as an adult, where I'm sitting there going, okay, in this book that I read this book, Daughter of the Reich. And at one point she's trying to get her boyfriend out of Germany and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, she could use so-and-so's papers. The author never went there. And I'm like, did you not see that obvious conclusion? You know what I mean? And then there was another one that I read. I want to say it was a Jean Granger book. And her books are like a little lighter. They're not as heavy. And it was set in Ireland. And I'm like, dude, your girlfriend is so obviously a Nazi spy. Like, we can all see it. How can
We
you
all know
not
it's
see
coming.
it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here like thinking of all these, and I'm like, I'm still not over the fact that the girl in the Daughter of the Reich didn't use her dead brother's papers.
Yeah.
And if you're reading
Or that
stuff,
there wasn't a reason for it. Yeah.
right, and I'm like, if the author ever holds a Q&A, I'm totally just going to be like, why didn't you go there? Like, I loved the book, but hello,
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I haven't read it, but fair. Yeah.
it was a good book. I just, that one part, I'm still like,
Still
I feel
angry.
like
Still
you
angry.
missed a clear solution to your problem, girlfriend. Like, so.
Right. This is so interesting, man. We could, but that's it, right? We met because we have a book club, so we could sit here and talk about books
Same, honestly.
the entire thing. All right, so I'm gonna take us back. I'm gonna pull us back, whether we want to be or not.
Impressive without the good coffee. You're doing a good job. Good job, Amanda.
Shares and coffee.
Maybe it's because of the bad coffee. I'm like, let's just get it done. Let's have to talk.
Let's do this.
Oh man. Okay. So my question for you is, as a teacher, right? A writing teacher, do you find that there are typically root causes that prevent learners from enjoying writing or feeling confident with their writing? So, like my thought process is that kind of with other things, right? Usually the surface issue is very rarely the whole problem or even the real problem. Do you find that to be the case when you're teaching kids and helping them kind of discover that they actually like writing or they're not as bad at it as they think they are?
Yeah. I have found that it is almost always a confidence issue. Almost, not always, but almost always a confidence issue. But that confidence issue rears its head in very different ways. Often that confidence issue will just, even for a kid that loves writing, they have maybe intense anxiety around it, right? But that's still a confidence issue at heart. Or maybe it's a kid that says they hate writing and they won't do it, or they dash off one sentence and are, here it is. But that's often usually a confidence issue. They, for some reason, feel like I'm not good at it anyway. I can't do it right. So why even bother trying? It almost always comes down to a confidence issue. And I feel like the key to helping and addressing it is to figure out what is the cause of that confidence issue. Why are they hesitant? My phrase is to always ask kids to say it another way. So they tell you, I hate writing. Okay, cool. Say that another way. And ask them to rephrase it, because often when they re-say it, they'll say, okay, I hate writing. Say that another way. I feel like I'm not good at writing. Okay, there we go. Right? That's an answer, and we can work with that. But yeah, it seems to almost always come down to a confidence issue that's rooted in a fear of making a mistake, a fear of it not being good enough, a fear of it being judged, a fear of not living up to an expectation set by an adult in their life, a fear of failure, a fear of doing the wrong thing. Often it is generated, unfortunately, by adults gatekeeping in some capacity. Adults often very, very well-meaningly, I don't think any adult is doing this with any sort of maliciousness in their heart, but adults very well-meaningly have this concept of what a child writer should look like. And often it's a very idealized version of childhood. They're like, why is my child not writing about, sitting under a tree and looking at the sun and thinking about life? They only write about farts. And I'm like, because they're 8. Farts are funny. Like, we have these ideas of what they should be writing about, what we want to see them write. Oh, that's too violent. That's too scary. And so a lot of times they end up feeling like no matter what I write, it's going to somehow be wrong. If the spelling's not wrong, the content's going to be wrong. And if the content's right, then the formatting's going to be wrong. And if the formatting's wrong, well, I'm not going to have answered the question correctly. There are so many areas that they can feel like they get it wrong. And I think that it often does come back to adults very unintentionally gatekeeping what quality writing is, especially when it comes to creative writing. I have seen so many students whose parents heartbreakingly message me and say things like, all he's writing is silly stories. And I'm like, yes, he's 7. Right. Or all he's writing is like I had this parent that was so upset. This is ages ago, but they wrote me because their child kept writing relatively violent stories, to be honest with you. And they were a little bit scary, but you could also tell that the kid was writing them as a way of sort of interfacing with the thing that was frightening and then overcoming it, if that makes sense. Nobody writes creepier stuff than like under 10 girls, like underage 10 girls. They write the creepiest, just nightmare-inducing stuff. But it's them addressing their fears and being successful and like overcoming, So they'll write a story about a little girl getting snatched by an evil man, and he, throws her in a basement and holds her there. But then at the end of the story, the little girl breaks out and frees all the animals that were trapped there with her, and they punch the guy in the face and run. But yeah, we have all these concepts of what kids should be writing, what stories they should be telling. And sometimes we forget to ask them what story it is they want to tell, and how they want to tell that story.
I had an experience too that maybe could be a factor for some parents where, okay, so my kids went to public school for a very, very short period of time when they were much younger. And my daughter would bring home these amazing writing samples. And I would sit there like, oh, she's such an amazing writer. Like, this is great. And then I started homeschooling and we had our first creative writing day. And it was a total and complete shit show. Like, we both ended up in tears. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, you write so beautifully in school and then you come home and like, what the fuck happened? Like, it was just so, and it was a total disaster. And so when we finally calmed down and we had a conversation about it, she was like, yeah, but the teacher would put all the structure on the like transparency for me. And she was basically just copying stuff down on a piece of paper. And so I had an expectation that this kid could write at a certain level. And so that's where I picked up, when the reality was she was being spoon fed these little tiny bites and all she had to do was kind of link them together. And so she actually couldn't write for it at all, right, when I got her home. And so I think maybe too, if people are pulling their kids out of school, there's a disjointedness there as well, where they're like, well, you've already had like 4 years of writing. How can you not get a sentence on paper? And it's like, yeah, but what was the structure of that? How did it look? Sure. How did it go down? So if you have that situation, you're not alone, because that's totally the tearful boat that I ended up in.
Yeah. Especially in terms of creative writing, because a lot of creative writing in schools, and I was a public school kid. My husband's a public school teacher. Like, I am not anti-public school at all, actually. But often, if I'm a kid in a public school, I'm not going to write a violent story at school, right? And that makes sense. And I think that's a good move. I think it's a good move, honestly. But I'm also maybe going to be hesitant to write a story that has, I don't know, any kind of content that make the teacher in some way question me, right? I'm going to write something really, really safe. I'm going to write about like puppies getting cuddled. And so sometimes I actually think that leaving that space and it being sort of the world is your oyster, that can actually be super overwhelming for kids, right? I also get a lot of messages from parents that say, I told her she could write whatever she wants. And I'm like, that might be too big. That might be too much, like too wide of a net to cast, So sometimes you need something in between the rigid structure of just copying down what's on the projector and the wide world of ideas can also be an element as well.
I feel like write whatever you want is akin to a marriage where it's like, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? Well, we could do this. No, I don't want that. We could do that. No, I don't want that. Right. It's that same, like, we're never going to get anywhere because there's too many choices, right? It needs to be like,
exactly.
Next dinner, Chinese. Like, these are the choices.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So, okay, I love that. That's awesome. So, you definitely have experience with partnering with parents because you've taught over 7,000 kids online and thousands more in person. If a parent wants to phone a friend and outsource components of writing instruction, I totally outsourced writing, right? All three of my kids have outsourced writing. They've all been to Jackson Pearce's classes. I think they've done creative writing with you. My older two did the 3-minute writing challenge. Astrid was in there forever because she had white screen paralysis for so long, and that helped her tremendously and stuff like that. So if a parent wants to outsource writing, what are things that you would suggest they look for I mean, there's a million and one choices. Like I'm in these homeschool resource groups and somebody's like, I need help with writing. And like 9,000 people chime in. So like, what should people look for if they're trying to outsource writing?
I would say first thing is sort of like I was saying earlier, ask your kid why, if they don't like writing, if they say they don't like writing, why do you not like writing? And then again, ask them to say it a different way and see if you can suss out what their reasoning is. And it can be very tempting to say, but just try to be a listening. Try to be a listener. If they love writing, ask them what would be most helpful to them as a writer. I loved writing, absolutely loved writing. But my parents, my mother raised us. She stayed home, and my dad is an engineer, so they had no idea what to do with this kid that was like, she's writing books, Brad. I don't know what's happening here. I think asking your kid what would be helpful to you as a writer, if they are enthusiastic writers, what their goals are as a writer, and then making sure you find a teacher that matches up with either what they're struggling with or what their goals are, right? If you have an enthusiastic writer, putting them in a writing class where you're going to really focus on writing academic essays may not be the thing that's right for them. If they want to be in a writing class, they say, I want to get published. I want to see my work in print. I want to finish a book. I want to write more poems. I would focus, like really sort of hyper focus on those individual specialties. If your kid says they dislike writing, or it's just a struggle, if it's an arm wrestling match every time you try to write, I would figure out what is the cause. Is it that they're afraid of getting it wrong? Is it that white screen paralysis, like you were saying? Is it that they don't feel confident? Even just like fine motor skills, honestly, can be a huge factor for kids, especially like younger kids. Just the fine motor skills of holding a pencil, like it can be literally painful. So I would try to really focus down onto what the core issue is and find a teacher that you think is going to mesh with their personality and be able to address those core issues. I think both of those things combined are going to be more powerful than any just like standard curriculum you can buy.
And I think that's a good point, because there's a lot of posts that I see where it's like, my kiddo's struggling with writing, and almost always the first follow-up question is, are you talking about formulating ideas and getting them into sentences, or are you talking about the physical act of writing? Because younger kids and also our neurodivergent kids, I mean, both my boys are dysgraphia kids, and if I ask them to write something, if it's typed, it's going to be a completely different experience and a completely different output than if I give them a pencil and paper, right? So, finding the modality that works best for your kids is a huge component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I also think just the way, a lot of it can just come down to the way you as an adult and caregiver in their lives approach writing with them, right? I know it can be difficult when you're like, just write a sentence, just please, for the love of God, just write a sentence down. I definitely get that. And I've seen that many times over. But I think especially when we're talking about those root competence issues, which again, I think is almost always the core issue. I think making sure that you're lining up with sort of where your kid is, what they need support on, what they need validation in, making sure you're not gatekeeping what you want them to write or what you think is appropriate for them to write. And another thing I always stress with adults and caregivers is to make sure that you are not allowing them to fail, even if they are trying very hard to. So I see a lot of, especially young kids, that will write, I'll say, we're going to write a story about Bob, and they'll say Bob died. And they turn it in and they're like, here. And what they want is for me to go, come on, take this seriously. You're not doing it right. You know you write more than that. Come on, you could, because that immediately gives them the ability to say, see, I told you I couldn't do it. I told you I couldn't. So why are we here? But if you're like, oh my gosh, Bob died. That is so sad. How? He doesn't know how he died. He doesn't even know how he died. That's terrible news. I hate that for him. He has amnesia and he's dead. What a horrible day. This is awful. And eventually they're gonna roll with it. Like you can only fight it for so long. So even when they're trying to fail, and if it's been a long and hard battle, they might be at the point where it's like it's easier to just try to fail, get it out of the way, and leave. But not allowing them to fail can be very useful. And then one other thing, sorry, I'm rambling, I know, but another thing that I notice so often with adults I talk to is they'll say, my kid hates writing, what can I do? And I'll say, well, do you do any writing with them? And they'll go, oh no, I don't write. Do you see how maybe though they are picking up on that and seeing that you don't like it either, or that you don't write because you don't think you have any good ideas, or you don't write because you don't think you'll be able to get it down correctly, or you don't write because you think your ideas are too weird. I think anything you can do as an adult to show them like, hey, I'm just going to write something and it may be good and it may be bad and I don't really care. I'm just going to write it down to get the idea out of my head and it's going to be fun and enjoyable and I'm going to like the process, as opposed to you as the adult having that same essentially sort of white screen paralysis of, I don't think it's a good idea, so I'm just not going to do it.
I think that's almost always one of my follow-up questions when I'm interacting with homeschool parents, when they talk about the fact that their kids don't like to read. And so one of my questions is always like, well, what's the culture around reading like in your home, right? Like, is reading a gift? Is reading revered? Are books, kind of a treasured item? And because if you're not creating that culture and you don't ever read, they're not going to be like, oh, this is going to be my new thing. And I'm going to, surround my world around this. So yeah, that makes sense that it would carry over with writing. I love that.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, for anyone who's listening or watching and you're sitting here and you're feeling like, oh shit, I'm really messing up this writing thing because all I do is focus on academic writing because we have to figure out how to get this like dialed in for school, for the online classes we're taking. And I haven't done any creative writing. I'm there with you, right? Like you're not alone. We're failing together. So maybe there's some, you're feeling better about that. So I'm feeling really guilty right about now.
It happens. There's only so many hours in the day too. I get that,
So I'm like, oh, he handles the creative writing on his own. He loves doing it. So I let him do that. And then we work on the other things. And shit, I should probably
probably just creative. Yeah, it happens.
Damn it. So I'm going to pencil in a few more hours a day so that we can do that. Right. That's because our crazy long school days aren't long enough as it is. Okay. So with that in mind, if a parent is keen to teach writing themselves, but is a bit unsure where to start, right? I'll raise my hand. I'm there. What sort of skills do you cover in your Raising a Writer Parent Masterclass? So you have a class for parents, yes?
Yeah. I have a class specifically for parents and caregivers that is literally just how to teach writing to your child. Because again, after all of these students, I kept seeing parents making the same very well-meaning mistakes over and over, or not knowing what the path forward was, right? So in the class, I go over, quite a variety of things in the class. I talk about sort of why we need to teach writing, just in case anybody's not clear on that. I also talk about a lot of the mistakes that parents are making. Gatekeeping is my number one mistake that parents and caregivers often make, again, with the best of intentions. They often make that mistake. And then also, the phrase, again, it's easy. You can do this. You can write anything you want, being sort of too open-ended about it, and not sort of meeting the kid where they are and figuring out what exactly it is that individual kid needs in order to be a successful writer. I go over a bunch of different writing games, writing strategies. It's very handheld, step-by-step. If they do this, say this. If they do this, you can say this. Different strategies for writers at all levels. Kids that are enthusiastic writers sometimes need as much, if honestly not more, support than reluctant writers. They often need quite a bit of hand-holding as well, even if they enjoy doing it. And then I talk about sort of next steps, how you can continue to grow their education as a writer, not just to meet your own level as a adult who writes, but how you can essentially set your kid up to exceed your skill set as a writer, how you can sort of get them on that path. I think the big thing that I would suggest to adults who are, we need to do more writing at home, I don't know where to start, would not be to sit down and start with like an essay. Or would not be to sit down and start with just a reading comprehension paragraph, right? Because while I definitely see the value of those things and the importance of being able to interpret, understand, and analyze the things you've read, absolutely 100%, it's not necessarily the most fun to do. So my thing would be to always find a way to gamify writing from as early an age as possible. How can you make it a game that you guys all do together? That it's not you're just sitting across from them as they, stare at a piece of paper and get angry about it. And then my other suggestion, especially if you have a kid who spirals into anxiety, is to not, a lot of kids do. Don't try to sit there for an hour, right? You're not going to come up with suddenly a way to help them love writing on minute 46 that you didn't come up with on minute 7. It's not going to suddenly hit you. So to keep writing short, sweet, especially when they're younger, short and sweet, and just sort of getting the ideas out, getting them used to the idea of having the idea, getting them used to the concept of having the idea, getting it out of their head and being okay with it. Right. And just sort of being like, what I thought of is cool. Let's roll with it. And they'll get better and better at the speed of that translation and also the effectiveness of that translation as they go.
Yeah. Yeah. The battle of wills of sitting there for an hour. Right. And we see that. We see that in so many conversations with parents about like this control, like I can't give up. They'll learn that they can, skirt their responsibility or this or that or whatever. Right. And it's like, there's so much about parenting that just goes so much better if we kind of release some of that need for control that we have, right? And just kind of go, I'm the grown up here. I got to go back to the drawing board and retool this and figure this out because what I'm doing isn't working. So rather than just both of us kind of being locked in a battle of wills and miserably pushing forward, let's step back, right? There's probably another way.
But like, if you let it become a battle of wills, especially over writing, like you're sitting across from your kid, they've got a blank piece of paper. It's been, 57 minutes. Everyone's miserable. Everyone's yelled. Your kid has drawn like 57 butts on the piece of paper. Like everybody is unhappy. And then they give in and they write something. You've still lost because they've lost, right? It wasn't a fun experience for them. They feel like they lost the battle of wills. So no one wins. No one wins in that situation. No one wins.
Yeah. You brought up age when you were talking about that in your last kind of explanation, Jackson, about like younger learners and things like that. And so I think, so I know you said you're not anti-public school. My own children, I had one kid who had a solid public school experience. One kid never made it. And then one kid had a horrendous public school experience, but not because of teachers. They were amazing. So I'm not super pro. It just wasn't a fit for our family.
Yeah, sure.
Far too hippie and just was not a thing for us, right? But I think part of what has happened is in general in the US compared to other countries, our public education system has come to this place where we're pushing kids harder, faster, younger, more, right? I mean, like we have kids in kindergarten and tutoring at this point, right? Which is just mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
Like if your kid's in tutoring and kindergarten, you need to DM us. It's broken. It's not working. Okay. That's not how kindergarten works. And other countries aren't doing that. And those are countries that are exceeding us in education rankings and things like that. Right. So part of that, I feel like, has trickled over into the homeschool world where, and you see it. Social media is probably a huge piece of that too, where, some parent posts like, oh, my kid won like blah, blah award for their writing and they're 7 or whatever. Like what are, especially in the younger years, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, age type things. We're not grade people, but those ages, like what do you think are reasonable expectations for a child to be building that foundation of writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say kindergarten and younger, I would actually think more about reading comprehension first, but not necessarily like quizzing them on the books, rather, I just heard a crash. Sorry. It's an animal, I assure you. There are so many animals in this house. Sorry. Okay. I would say kindergarten and younger. I think basically, can they tell you who the main character of the story is and what the problem is they wanted to solve? Just sort of those basics about what the story was about. And are they willing to tell you a story? Does it make sense? Who cares? Are they willing to tell you a story? Can they get something in their head and tell you a story? And if they've got that, can they tell a story with you, right? Can you say, and then this happens? And they go, okay, yeah, and then this happens. Can you go back and forth and create a story together? First and second grade, I would focus more on, getting that story out of their head. Maybe not beautifully, maybe not perfectly, but can they get that story out of their head and onto paper? Often the struggle with that age range is their brain moves faster than their hand can move. And so they get frustrated that they can't get it down fast enough. But I think sort of taking your time and sort of letting that become part of the process. I actually think timed writing can be very useful at that age, not because I think that they need to write faster, but rather because the idea of like, you may not be able to get every single thing down, and that'll be okay. I actually think timed writing can be useful, not as just as a helpful boundary, right? The walls of a play pit, if you will, right? Not to like make them stressed and not to make them anxious, but rather as a way to say, you've only got 3 minutes to do this. Let's see what we can do. I didn't quite finish. That's cool. Let's see what we're going to say anyway. Just to kind of practice that. Also, not with all kids, to be fair, not with all kids. If you have a timer anxious kid, don't go anywhere near that. I get it. And then I think beyond that, just building up that foundation of how do I communicate ideas? How do I focus on the main thing I'm trying to communicate? How can I use bigger, more powerful vocabulary words? Not necessarily longer, just more powerful. How can I introduce new concepts, new characters, and just building step by step? I don't think that there's a magic age that they have to be able to, write a novel by, rather. But rather maybe at, I would say, 11, 12, 13, I think maybe a good goal, a good base goal would be for them to at least be able to take the concept that's in their head and in some way get it down onto paper. And if it's down on paper in a way that's not communicating exactly what they want to perfectly, for them to be willing to adjust it and change it and to not be filled with frustration. Maybe the big goal of writing education in general is just flexibility, is the understanding that writing something down and getting something wrong doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It just means, again, that writing can be hard sometimes and that translation can be difficult, and that's okay. We can always adjust and change it.
I like that point that writing can be hard sometimes, because before, when you were saying, like, as an example of perhaps not the best way to go about it, is like, it's easy, just write something down, right?
Yeah.
And immediately, I mean, my oldest child is 16 years old. And immediately when you said that, it brought me back to parenting classes when I was pregnant. And they were like, breastfeeding's easy. Everybody can do it. Breastfeeding is not freaking easy, right? Like, it is not. And like, I had tremendous challenges, but there had been this seed that had been planted, which was like, it's easy and everyone can do it. And that just makes you feel like even more like crap when you're
why can't I do it then?
Yeah. And so when you said that, so I'm like, acknowledging, like, writing is hard. It is. It's not an easy skill, and it's something that we work at. And so I like that acknowledgement.
My big thing is always like writing is hard, but we can do hard things. It's okay for it to be hard, right? And especially I always reference, if you look at the Olympic athletes, right? After they run a sprint, they're, hands on their knees panting because it's hard. Like, they're the best in the world, but it's hard to do. It's okay for something to be hard.
I love that analogy. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I find the discussion around age appropriateness really interesting, because we're in California and we homeschool through the homeschool charter system, which means that we are required to do state testing. And our state testing required in 4th grade that a student be able to read 3 sources, 2 or 3 sources, I can't remember now, and then use those sources, cite them appropriately, and write a multi-paragraph informative essay.
That seems
all
intense.
Within like I think they had maybe 90 minutes to do it, but it was all, set, and it's timed, and they have to type it. So they have to read it all, take their notes, draft what they're going to write, and then write their multi-paragraph essay. And I mean, these are 9 and 10-year-olds.
That seems like a lot to me. Yeah.
And it started the year before in 3rd grade. They had to write at least, I think they were supposed to write at least 2 paragraphs to do this. And now it was, the expectation of like, well, you should have been learning, and that there's that push of like, well, they should have been learning a 5-paragraph essay because they need to come close to producing a 5-paragraph essay in a timed scenario on a random Thursday morning with whatever information we give them to read and write about. And, it's that thing. There's such a disconnect between what the average 9 or 10-year-old is capable of, what they want to do, and what some of these like standardized testing requirements are out there.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard for parents to know, like, well, how much do we just say, screw it, it doesn't matter, or we'll get there eventually, right? With homeschooling, you have that ability to say, well, we'll get there eventually. You'll get the 5-paragraph essay at some point, and it doesn't have to be in 4th grade.
Yeah, for sure.
But then, there's that struggle of like, well, if all the other fourth graders are learning it, like we probably should be too.
Yeah, it becomes quite tricky, I think, also because the things they will have to read and write about are only going to get more difficult. So I do think that there's a risk, not a risk, but if you do miss some of those milestones that are completely, created, like I definitely acknowledge those milestones are we're the ones creating them. But then also, if you miss some of the early ones, it becomes an even bigger mountain to climb later. So it's tricky. I don't envy that at all, especially knowing you have to take those standardized tests. That's tricky. I do think, for what it's worth, even if you're like, the idea of sitting my kid down and teaching them to read different things and cite sources is incredibly overwhelming and unfun, and I don't want to do that. It's not like, absolutely, I don't want to do that. I think a way you can still teach at least some of those skills, though, is by reading together and also reading thoughtfully. Even if you have a kid who loves to read, a lot of kids love to read, but they're not reading thoughtfully about it. They're just reading the thing, allowing the story to be entertaining, and then moving on, which is great. Like, nothing wrong with that. But could you have them compare this story to that story just in conversation, right? Can they express to you what they liked about that story, why it worked for them or why it didn't work for them, what they wish the character had done differently, why the character made the choices that they made? Can you ask those sorts of questions that will get them used to sort of analyzing and thinking through what they're writing, as opposed to just sort of reading and leaving it at that? I think that can actually really help with those compare all of these three articles, those questions later on. And that's something you can also do even at, again, like kindergarten level, first grade level, second grade level. And it can just be a conversation. It doesn't have to be a big to do. It can just be, while you're out for a walk, did you finish that book? Yeah. What did you like about it? Or did you like that the character did this? You can be really specific. If they're just giving you, I don't know, questions, you can be really specific about it.
Mm-hmm. That's how our reading comprehension type stuff has always been done, because we're super loosey-goosey homeschoolers, right? So it'll be like, like super annoyed with this character in my book, blah, 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 blah. And the kids will be like, oh, yeah, that totally happened in this book. Yeah. And I was like, dude, and so we have kind of these things, right? It doesn't have to be a quiz. It doesn't have to be like a sit down, write it down kind of thing.
Yeah, just be a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like a family book club where you're all reading a different book, or maybe you're group reading the same book, whatever. It's flexible,
absolutely. Yeah. In my I do a lot of book clubs, and my questions are always I ask a lot of questions that I don't know the answer to, and a lot of questions I do know the answer to, and a lot of questions that are just opinions. And then we always have a final class where it's, how did you feel about the book? And you're allowed to feel any way you want to. You're allowed to hate it, love it, however you want to feel is fine. But I want you to explain why you feel that way. And I get a lot of kids that are enthusiastic readers that really struggle with that. Because they've never had to really sort of think through their thought process about reading. So yeah, I think that can help a lot. But I still do so much testing, and so much testing that is for the masses and not for the individual. So I feel that pain as well.
I love that. Yeah. I lead a book club, and ironically, you mentioned Jennifer Nielsen earlier. We read a Jennifer Nielsen book every single semester because the kids are obsessed with them. They're so good. There's a new one that just came out, and it's in our fall semester. I haven't even had a chance to read it yet, but her books are so good that I'll read it before the semester starts, but I don't have to pre-read it before putting it on the list, because we already know we're going to love it, and it's going to be good, and it's going to be her usual quality, right? But it's hilarious because the kids in book club, I've had them in book club for so long, and they've developed kind of this lingo of their own. Like, they have a thing they call main character syndrome, where like they get really annoyed when the authors dumb things down, and it always works out fine for the main character, even though historically the odds of it working out that way would have been slim to none, and then they have like Regina George and Nellie Olson characters, and they'll be like, this is a Nellie Olson character, and I'm like, yes it is, and they've got kind of these and it's fun to be able to come together and discuss books, which is awesome. So you can even find your kids' book clubs.
Yeah, that connecting books to other media. I think that it's the book to yourself, the book to the larger world, the book to another book. That's a major sort of reading comprehension and writing milestone for kids to hit. And a lot of kids, again, they're just such good readers that I think the parents or caregivers forget to ask that. But that can still be a pretty critical part of that education as well.
Yeah. Well, we have been on a huge giveaway streak lately, haven't we, Amanda? Like we are on a
Yeah.
roll. And so we were chatting with Jackson about coming on today, and Jackson's getting on the giveaway train with us. So what do you have for our listeners this week? We're going to do it'll be a random selection of giveaway. There'll be a Google form. I'll start with that.
Love that. Love that. So I'm going to give away one section, one prize, my parent masterclass. It's called Raising Writers. It is a 6-video module masterclass that breaks down sort of the concept of writing as play, which is my big overall concept in terms of how I approach teaching writing and reading, is the concept of writing as play. The mistakes that, again, very well-meaning parents and caregivers might be making, the sort of early approaches, like how to create writing situations, how to create writing scenarios in your everyday life without having this big, today we're going to write sort of session, how you can incorporate it into your everyday life, how you can start writing. We're going to talk about writing narratives. We will definitely have a whole section on troubleshooting and the biggest sort of problem areas that I see come up time and time again, and about how to give feedback to your kid on their writing in a way that's not going to leave either of you in tears or with a slamming door. How to give feedback in a way that is both useful to them, but also doesn't make them, want to stomp away.
Love that. Thank you so much. So we will put a link to a Google form where you can enter to win Jackson's masterclass in the description for everywhere you watch the podcast, if it's on Spotify, iTunes, whatever. And then also on our link tree, on our Instagram account, in our private Facebook group, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. It'll be everywhere. So enter. We love giving things away. So the more people that enter, the happier we get. So come join us.
No, it's
Pretty
so
awesome.
true.
So we have, so Jackson, we have a rotating segment that we do every week. We've got a whole bunch where we do like student spotlight and stuff. This week's rotating segment is Am I the Asshole? But I know it's a homeschool edition of Am I the Asshole, which is always fun. But I know you also have to teach. Do you have to book it, Jackson?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. I just wanted
I would love to share my opinions on whether or not someone's being an asshole. So I love this.
I know, right? Okay, so before we get into that, Amanda, do you want to ask a favor of our listeners?
I do. I do just want to really shout out this this giveaway. You should absolutely go enroll for this. I know I can't win it, but I need it. So when we get done here, I'm going to go sign up for it because I have a little bit of downtime this summer, right? This is the good time. Downtime this summer.
For the whole thing, also in every section, I've got like your actionable steps. I've got resources for all age levels. It's kind of been a passion project for a few years now, so I'm very excited that it is now available and out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could win it. I like free stuff, but I can't. You can, so you should go register, whoever is listening or watching. But beyond that, right, we've talked about this before, we're a new podcast, and there are some features that we can't unlock on some of our different social media platforms until we have X number of followers, right? And it varies from platform to platform. For example, we can't customize our YouTube link extension just yet. We can't actually set up something that we want to do on TikTok just yet because we don't have the right kind of numbers. And so we would be eternally grateful if you would pull up Homeschool Moms Unfiltered on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or wherever it is you hang out. And please give us a follow, right? It's not a huge thing. I know that we're showing up in your algorithms, and so it's easy to forget to actually go click the follow link if you've been watching things. I'm super guilty of it myself, but try to remember that the people that you actually enjoy watching, they need the follow for a whole bunch of arbitrary reasons, but we still need it. So we would really appreciate it.
Kind of like fourth grade California writing standards. We just need it. We just need to do it.
Yeah, you just have to do it. I'm sorry.
Yes, I totally agree. All right, well, here we go.
Am I the asshole? Tell me. I just have to know.
All right, so we have an anonymous submission. No, but I totally get that. I mean, we don't get too many yes, please say my name and ask if I'm the asshole. So we have changed the names. I use the name Penelope because I'm on a Bridgerton kick right now. So yeah, right. Penelope asks, am I the asshole for snipping at my 13-year-old? And we should preface that Penelope already kind of says in the submission, I know I was an asshole, but can you tell me how much of an asshole I was, right? So I don't think this parent is tell me that I was totally okay here. So smart kid, but as far as he's concerned, he can never do anything wrong. He's kind of a woe is me, victimized complainer of a teen. So like many moms of multiple kids, I can totally attest to this. Penelope sometimes mixes up her kids' names or catches herself midway through a name before catching it and using the correct kid's name. So she started to say a kid's name and then kind of like change. So it would be like, Amanda, can you XYZ, right? And so the kiddo got upset and said, of course you called me so-and-so's name. That just proves he's your favorite. We all know that. And Penelope, admittedly, and not her finest parenting moment, said, if you're so sure I like X better, maybe you should work on being more likable. Stop trying to take a simple and common mistake and turn it into a bigger meaning. So again, she was already like, I was kind of an asshole. Like, how bad is it? Right. So what do you peeps think?
I mean, I think, was it particularly kind? No, it wasn't particularly kind. But I also think the reality is most teenagers are really difficult. I know I was, right? Like I knew everything. Just ask my teenage self. And that's a big part of why my 20s were so hard, right? Like all of a sudden I really knew that I really didn't know anything. And I had to actually learn all the things. So, I would go with not really the asshole. Like finest parenting moment? No. But yeah, not really asshole.
What do you think, Jackson?
I think like a little bit, but it also sounds like the kid was also being a little bit of an asshole. But it also like everybody is at some point, right? Like everyone is. And to me, I feel like this is a great opportunity for Penelope to be like, hey, listen. So that was a real asshole move for me. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I was frustrated, just like you're frustrated too. Like it happens, not my best move. It's a good opportunity to acknowledge that mistakes were made.
Yeah, I think that was my thought when I read it, was like, I think we've all had, even not with our kids, but just in life in general, right? Just moments. And I think the bigger thing, like one of my kids was on a trip last year and he was stressed about something. And another teenager on the trip came up and asked him a question and he sneaked at the kid because he was stressed about the other thing, and he called me and he was like, oh my gosh, I sneaked at this kid and now I don't know what to do. And I was like, honestly, it totally sucks, but you're going to have to it's going to be 10 seconds of uncomfortableness, but you're going to need to walk up to that kid and go, dude, that thing before, I'm so sorry. That had nothing to do with you. I was stressed about something else. And I go, it's so uncomfortable to walk up and do that. It's hard for adults, let alone a teenager. But I'm like, if you can get past that and just do it, it'll diffuse the situation, right? And so that was kind of the thought process that I had in my head was like, yeah, like I'm a gentle parenting type. So for me, I'm like, right? But we all have our moments and just walk and be like, dude, I'm sorry I said it that way. Maybe it's an opportunity to open a conversation about like the overall dynamic between you, but yeah, I think I'm always about apologizing to kids if we know we're in the wrong.
Yeah, and like and a real apology, not I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't, right? Like sorry, but it's just that you did, right? A good apology. Mm-hmm. I love my parents dearly, but nobody ever apologized in a sincere way, and I actually think it would have been really helpful a few times in my childhood.
Yeah, totally. I could see that. Yeah. So we all have our moments, right? I mean, I think that's the end of the day, right? Like we all have our moments. If you're a perfect parent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 18 plus years,
you're delusional.
Send us yeah, exactly. Right. I was like, send us a message because I'm not really sure who you are or how you're doing that. But yeah, I think it's more likely that you're delusional, right? Because I'm like, it's just not possible, right? Whether it's and that's the same not only with your kids, but with your partner or with your coworkers or whoever. Like we're all just going to have our moments, so.
Yeah, I think that's it for me, right? Like in my world, there's the everyday, yeah, I was a little bit of an asshole. And we do that a lot in our family. There's a lot of me going to the kiddo or, and vice versa and saying like, look, that was not my finest moment. I was stressed about this. I was thinking about that. And I'm sorry that I didn't respond the way that I should have, and to me, yeah, okay, maybe it's an asshole moment, but those are the daily livable learning asshole moments that you want to teach and practice, right? And then there's the am I the asshole moment where you read it and you're like, holy yeah, actually, you were the asshole. Or no, actually, your mother-in-law was the asshole. Like, hands down, no question, right? Like,
You know my mother-in-law?
don't need to.
Love it. Oh my gosh, that's so great. So, yeah. So, Penelope, we love you. You're awesome. Apologize to your kid. Have a nice heart-to-heart. Move on. You're good.
Yep, totally. So we love the listener contributions for our segments, right? It absolutely makes it significantly more fun for us, and we would love for you to get involved. So you can always DM us your Am I the Asshole Student Spotlight or your messy moment submissions. We sort through them and include them when we can. And if you would prefer to make them anonymous, you just have to let us know. We are happy to do that. Or if you want us to do a shout out for whatever your messy moment is and use your social media handle to help with a little bit of exposure, we're happy to do that too. Just let us know which way you'd like it to go. You
Do they
can
all get
send.
names? That's the real question. Do they all get Bridgerton aliases?
We should. Exactly, right? Like,
As long as we leave. Exactly. As long as we leave Megan in charge of it, they will. I haven't watched Bridgerton, so I don't even want to. I don't know what it'll be like NCIS names or whatever I'm currently watching.
If we run out of Bridgerton names, we'll go to Outlander. It's fine. It's good. It's all good.
Nice.
So, yep, absolutely. I love it. Well, would you like to close us out with our mantra for the week, Amanda?
Sure. So this week's mantra is, in this homeschool haven, we find beauty in the messy moments and wisdom in the wild ones. There you
That's
go.
for sure.
Deep breaths. Yes.
Exactly. Well, Jackson. Exactly, right? Like, I love it. Jackson, thank you so much for joining us this week. It has been awesome having you. We will put links in the description for this podcast episode if you need to find Jackson, if you want to take the class, if you're like, forget the giveaway, I need the class now, right? We'll put a link for you to be able to register. Jackson's book clubs, we'll link all that good stuff. And you can always send us a DM if you have additional questions. We're always happy to help. So have an awesome rest of your day. Thanks for joining us, Amanda. I hope you get a good cup of coffee today, and happy homeschooling, everyone.
Yeah. Have a great one.